Hi there. Okay, don't be too shy to put anything down. It's just your own opinions. Nobody's going to judge you for it, okay? So how do you persuade your parents to buy you something? Good question. Okay, let's look at some of the ways that we can look at that will help you make your writing more persuasive, okay? What is persuasion, first of all? Persuasion is the process of one person trying to convince someone to do something. A writer attempting to persuade an audience must make use of both credibility and emotion. Basically, persuasion is generally carried out by changing the way someone feels. Okay, so maybe your mom doesn't feel that you need new tackies, but you're desperate to get them. You've got to think of a way to change her emotion that's credible, that's believable. Okay, that's what you have to do. Now we're going to look at some statements to see if it makes you feel anything. Okay, so you can put in, I want you to put in the chat box. For example, let's look at number 1. Zoos are horrendous places for innocent, freedom-loving animals. Does that make you feel like that statement is correct and true? Or does it make you feel like it's a load of rubbish? What do you think? Stick it onto the web chat and we can look at it. Do you agree or disagree? That's it. Zoos are horrendous places. Right, good. There's someone. Yes, he says it's a load of rubbish because zoos must have good points. Some others have mixed feelings. Others totally agree with that statement. So that's good. You see, the statement and the words used are making you feel something. They're persuading you to one way of thinking or another. Yes, it all depends how the animals are treated. Depends the type of zoo. It might depend which country it's in, because some countries are not very kind to animals. They just look upon them as beasts of burden and treat them badly. Anyway, so there's an example of what we've been talking about, persuasion. Okay, right, good. I'm glad you've all answered there. There's only 5 of them, so let's look at number 2. That's true, but that's what happens to animals. If they go out in the wild, they might die or get injured. And that is nature, I suppose, isn't it? And should people interfere with nature? What does it cause trouble? You also need to think about that. Okay. Right. Number 2, think about this one. Think about people you know, your relatives, aunties, grannies. When old people hit the age of 50, they should be put to sleep. What's put to sleep? You know what that means? It's a euphemism, which means it's a nice way of saying, let's kill them, as there are too many people and not enough resources on the planet. Is this a solution to population growth? What does this statement make you feel like? Somebody really objects to this one. Yes, that's right. That's good. Someone's thinking on economic lines there. Companies wouldn't have anyone to do the work properly. There's only youngsters left. That's good. You see how this can arouse feelings in you by what you say. That's what you need to do when you're writing. So this doesn't look like, right, that's it. Yeah, people who say that should be put to sleep, perhaps. No. Right, that's it. If you haven't got any older relatives, as somebody just said, who's going to spoil you? Who's going to give you birthday presents, etc.? You know, you've got to think about that as well. Do people become useless? Do their brains die off when they hit 50? What's the story? Think of all the movie stars and people like that who are way over 50. Should they still be around? Yeah, it would be pretty sad if there was no one over that age group. In fact, that reminds me, there was a movie made, and it was a TV program where all the adults died with some virus, and it was only children left to try and run the world. So it was quite interesting. Okay, so again, that's aroused feelings in you. It's made you think of things, and that's what persuasive or argumentative writing is about. Look at number 3. Yeah. Number 3 now. That's right. You would. Some people live to a very ripe old age, but it can be genetic. Of course, if you've got good genes in your family, GENES, you might live to a ripe old age, unless you're in an accident or whatever. So some people would be cut off in their prime, when they're at their best. Maybe that's the best age to be. When you're the smartest, when you've got the most money, when you've got all sorts of power. Right, going on to number 3 now. This is a different kettle of fish. And this has happened a lot and still happens when people do not sterilize animals. Surely you're not going to drown those cute little kittens? What kind of person would be saying that? What does that make you feel if you saw somebody put a bunch of kittens in a big bag and was going to take it down to the river? Would you think this was a nice person? That's it. Who would be horrible enough to do this? Surely you're not going to drown those cute little kittens. Yes, it would be horrible. Again, is it to do with money? They haven't the money to sterilize their pet, so they just let it have the kittens or puppies every couple of months, and that poor animal's suffering by doing that in the first place. And then they've got to get rid of the little kittens, because nobody wants them. You've got to think of all the reasons, both sides of any argument. Yes, it would be absolutely nasty and horrible. So again, something's aroused your feelings in this statement, and again, it's the way it's been written. Right, going on from animals to people now. Babies should be sterilized at birth to keep down the population. Okay, that's right. Someone's come up with an example of a royal family. There would be no one to take on the succession of being the king or queen. And it could kill the entire human race, couldn't it? If no one could ever have any children, and you had to get them from test tubes or cloning or something, it's not a good idea, is it? If you look what happened in China when they had a one-child policy there, everyone was only allowed one child. They killed all the female children because they thought the male children would make more money for them in the long run and look after them in their old age. But now everyone in that age group between 20 and 40, it's all men in China. There's no women. They can't get married. They can't have any children anyway. So in retrospect, the government looks back and says, maybe that was a bad policy. Hey, so there's always repercussions to something if you don't think it through. Again, looking at both sides of the coin, both sides of an argument. Right, what about the last one, number 5? Medical experimentation should be carried out on evil prisoners rather than cute little animals. I understand everyone's scared of medical experiments, but all these ones that are tested, beauty products tested on animals, should that be allowed? Or should it rather be on evil prisoners who are murderers, serial killers? Should they be in society at all? Surely if you belong to a society, you have to obey the rules. Yes, there are people that get paid to do medical testing, and they go and do it. Particularly in Europe, they pay students to, let's try out this drug on you, after they've done lots of previous tests, obviously. Yes, you can agree to disagree with anybody or anything. evil prisoners were doing it out of self-defense. Depends if they decided to murder innocent people or not, I think. Yes, serial killers could have mental disabilities. I mean, you would think they must have, because it's generally known that they are not empathetic people. They don't care about anyone else's feelings. Oh, someone's in agony and it's painful, and they don't feel a thing. They just carry on. So it is something mental there, I think, with the serial killers. Anyone else like to say anything about it? Okay, but just in general, looking at those statements, they've made you think of things, both sides of the coin perhaps, and these are the kind of statements you can actually make as a topic sentence. If you were writing a paragraph, you think of something that's maybe contentious, that people will agree or disagree with. It all depends who your audience might be. But we're going to be looking at that just now. Now, here's the very technical term for being persuasive. Okay, this is just it's a piece of general knowledge you should know for the future, because most of the stuff you will be writing in future will be persuasive or argumentative the older you get. The three artistic proofs by Aristotle. Anybody know who Aristotle is, or when he was alive? Who is he? Anybody? I don't think we have any history buffs here today. Right, Aristotle was around about 350 BC. So that's way over 2,000 years ago. And that's when they were still talking about persuasive strategy. And he's the one that came up with the three original ones, the three artistic proofs by Aristotle. And he was considered one of the greatest thinkers in the world, in politics, psychology, ethics, all those things. Okay, so that's why people who are studying philosophy will study Aristotle. Anyway, for writing, he came up with those three things for a persuasive strategy. You can use pathos, which is an appeal to emotions, as a way of convincing the audience of an argument by creating an emotional response to a plea or convincing story. Okay, so those 5 statements we looked at appealed to your emotions quite a bit. The second one is called logos, an appeal to logic as a way of persuading an audience with reason, facts, and figures. Some people like to think logically. They're not really into emotions. It doesn't really affect them. And then finally, the third artistic proof is called ethos, or ethical appeal, which is a means to convince an audience of the author's credibility or character. So in other words, the writer must be intelligent, have credibility, and show he is trustworthy before someone's going to believe what he says. You're not going to persuade me otherwise, unless it's a very ethical writer. Okay, so that's a bit of technical information for you. Pathos, logos, ethos, which are known as the 3 artistic proofs by Aristotle. Let's look at one of his famous quotations briefly and see if you think, what does it mean? Is it credible? Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Now you need to think about that one. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. I mean, you would think, gosh, I must know myself. I've been around long enough. But maybe he's referring to feelings. Can you deal with things? Can you admit that maybe you need anger management because you don't handle it well? Are you addicted to something? Do you need some treatment for that? So that's about really knowing yourself. It's like, if somebody doesn't help me with something, I won't be able to do it myself. Okay? So that's quite an interesting one. And another famous saying of his, another famous quotation is, all men All men by nature desire knowledge. So that means everyone who is born wants to learn something. Okay? There's not anyone that can just sit and be as dumb as when they were a baby. Okay? And that's why that saying, I think, came about. All men by nature desire knowledge. Okay, I think that's enough about Aristotle. Let's get on to our own stuff. Right, here's the type of persuasive techniques you need to use in order to persuade people in your writing. The first one, as always, adjectives and adverbs, because that's what makes the reader feel in a certain way about an issue. Look at the example. The poor, pathetic little creature was shaking like a leaf, completely terrified. He was so pitiful I just had to save him before he died a horrible death. So just by using those types of words, you see how their author has engendered sympathy for this little creature. And you want to look after it. You want to save it from even more suffering. And that's just because of the way the adjectives and adverbs have been used. Also, you see how powerful adjectives and adverbs can be. If your writing doesn't have them, it's pretty boring writing. Okay, so adverbs, adjectives. What about this one? If you want to comment on any of these, stick it on the web chat. What about appealing to your sense of justice or fairness or integrity? For example, Mom gave my brothers and sisters 1,000 rand each for their birthday, but I didn't get that. All I got was a measly 50 rand. She hates me and I love her so very much. Now, is this fair? Is this appealing to your sense of justice? Do you think Mother was right to only give the one sibling 50 rand and the others got 1,000 rand? When you look at it like that, it's definitely not fair. But what could be the other side of the coin? Maybe this guy stole 1,000 rand from his mom at some point, and that's why she's only giving him 50 rand now. There could be something else. Is the notion it is trying? Yes, you see? Correct. We've got to look at both sides as you would do in an argument or a persuasion. Maybe this guy did something seriously badly wrong, and this sibling is just definitely not getting 1,000 rand. That's his punishment. But we don't know till we hear the rest of the argument. So that has appealed to your sense of justice, because it's not just, it's not fair, but there must be a reason for it. Maybe it's we don't want to say a wicked stepmother, because that's what comes in all the fairy tales, isn't it? Okay, so think of that. If you're writing something, maybe you need to appeal to someone's sense of justice. Again, as we've previously discussed, formal and informal language. Informal and inclusive language. Writers often use informal or colloquial language to make themselves seem to be one of your in-crowd, one of your friends, one of your pals. And they assume that you will have the same viewpoint because you're all in the same little group, you're all in the same little clique. They use language like we or us to pull the reader towards his viewpoint, which is a bit like brainwashing. But everyone in a little group like that, a little in-crowd, a little clique, they're a bit like sheep. If they all think the same thing, that should really be impossible. Some people are doing it just to pretend to be in the popular group of people, etc., because you all have your own personal opinion. You can think for yourself. You don't need anyone to think for you. As someone else said, let's go and jump in the fire. Are we really all going to go and do that? No, not unless you are a real sheep. So formal, inclusive language, informal and inclusive language. Okay, that's to make people try to think the same way as the author. Right, the next thing you could put into your essay would be cliches. Even though they're overused expressions, everyone understands them. That's why they're called cliches. Only time will tell. It's the end of the road. This country's going one way down. Okay? So those are called cliches because everyone uses them, and they might be handy in your persuasive essay at some point, maybe to sum up a little final conclusion in a paragraph or so. Right, going back to emotions, because that's obviously very important. Emotive words and connotations. A connotation is an implication or inference. What are you trying to infer? That sort of thing. What are you implying? These types of words usually have an emotional impact on the reader, just like our first 5 sentences there had an emotional impact on you. Look at these words. What do they make you think straight away? Agonizing, excruciating, heartbreaking, malicious, malevolent, inconceivable, implausible, staggering, mind-boggling, astounding. So that's right. If I show you everything from pain and disparity and heartbreak, evil, these are the kind of words you should try to be using in your essays because they're very powerful. They're just like they are adjectives and adverbs. So they are very emotive. They're made to make you think and to try and persuade you around to someone's way of thinking. Right? What about another thing that's a bit like using logic here, which is evidence and expert opinion. This is used to prove what the writer's saying must be correct and adds weight to the argument. For example, according to the British Institute, global warming has caused cold water fish to seek even colder waters, leaving many areas without fish, which of course are feeding people. So if the fish are going further and further north to the North Pole or further south to the South Pole, that's going to leave a bit of a mess because they're looking for cold water. It's getting too hot because of global warming. So that was an expert opinion. Excuse me, and that's what you should be using as part of your argument, part of your persuasion. Right. Yes. No wonder it makes you feel sad. Right. The next thing, exaggeration. Most people exaggerate every day. Okay, so it really means overstating something. For example, you've been told millions of times to get a haircut. Maybe you've only been told 20 times, but they're just going to say millions of times to make it worse. We're exaggerating. And that's what you will do perhaps when you're trying to persuade someone. You'll exaggerate. Even just, oh, I'm so hungry, I'm starving, blah, blah, blah. You'll exaggerate. You haven't eaten for 3 days. Right, and the thing that should be in every single essay, never mind just persuasive ones, figures of speech, metaphor, and simile. You should all know what these are, and you should all use them in every assignment. Vivid descriptions can be very powerful. A metaphor, we say one thing is another. His bedroom was a disaster area. No, I'm not saying it's a bedroom anymore. It's a disaster area, right? It looks like an airplane crashed on it or something. Okay, so the metaphor, his bedroom was a disaster area. Simile, we'll use the words like or as in there somewhere. He attacked the buffet like an eagle swooping down on its prey. He was so hungry, he was starving. That's how he did it. Similes are great things to use because you just make up your own. Your little brother jumped on your bed like it was a trampoline, that sort of thing. These are similes. So making use of them is great. Now, let's see if you know what a hypothetical situation is. It's one that you could just talk about. You would say, what if such and such happened? suppose that X, Y, Z happen. And should a comet actually hit the Earth, we would, would mankind survive, etc. If you sold your soul to the devil, where would you end up? What would happen? So hypothetical things are things that may not happen, but you might be able to use them as a means of persuading someone about something. And we're talking all about persuading people to do things, right? The last few, we've got repetition. The repetition of words, phrases, and ideas can reinforce an argument, okay? It's been proved that younger criminals are more likely to turn into teenager tearaways and more likely to never get a job and more likely to become older criminals rather than becoming good citizens. So we repeated something to really make it stand out in people's heads. Okay, that's repetition. Here's another type of question, the rhetorical question, which generally requires no answer. Okay, but it makes the reader jump to the conclusion that the writer wants. He's using it to persuade you to his way of thinking, whether you realize it or not. It is an incredibly beautiful place, so why would you not want to visit the Badlands National Park, which we all know about? Okay, and look at this one here. It's supposed to be a bit of a joke. I don't know if you'll get it. If vegetarians eat vegetables, then what do humanitarians eat? Okay, what's a humanitarian? People who are dedicating their lives to saving mankind, to helping people, etc., etc. So if you know the answer to that one, put it on the web chat. And then finally, we might get squeeze in tone. This is the last one, referring to the impression the writer wants to make to persuade you to his point of view. He will write enthusiastically, humorously, knowledgeably, logically. Maybe he'll be neutral, or maybe he'll be witty. Okay, so you can use that. Oh, I think we've been cut off. But let's see. No, we're fine. Right, everybody, we haven't had time to finish as usual. But if you have any comments or you would like to get this piece of paper with the document with that information on it, write to me on the web chat, okay? Thank you very much for joining us. It was good to see you here and hopefully see you next time. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.